All right, so what I have here are what are called St. Louis style ribs. You can tell that they're St. Louis style ribs because they're pretty darn thick. The other part is they're different than regular spare ribs because spare ribs at the top of this also have another lip that are the rib tips, and like the cartilage kind of flows through it, and it's one of the fattiest but most awesome pieces of meat. But they've obviously cut that off. They've also cut off the lip at the end of it. So the other part about St. Louis style ribs, then, when you buy them from the store, sometimes they have a big flap of meat here. They've already trimmed that off here. So one of the things that you need to do to St. Louis style ribs, and spare ribs for that matter, is there's this membrane on the back of the bones. I removed this membrane because the membrane keeps out you know, the flavor, the smoke, everything that you want to be part of the flavor of the meat, even if it's come from the bottom. So you have to actually remove it. So Stephen Reichlin recommends a butter knife. I don't know where he gets his ribs that he can do that. But basically what I do is I find a bone and I shimmy the knife underneath just in small little chunks. And then I do the same thing at the next bone. I start to rip up as best I can, and I go back to the previous bone, maybe pull off a little more each time. And basically, by the end of it, if you're pretty patient with it, you'll be able to get that membrane up and off of the meat of the bones. And what you also notice too is that it will expose a layer of fat that's between the membrane and the bone, for that matter too. And basically I'm going to do this whole thing like this, one little step at a time, and I'll go a little further each time with it until I get down here. And if you've done it correctly, like 100% correctly, more power to you. I rarely get it done correctly, like down to a T, like, because what'll happen is you get to about right here. Look how much of that membrane has to start coming up every time you do it. But if you do it right, you'll get most of the membrane off of there, and that'll allow you to directly spice your meat, and also to use that fat as part of your cooking. I like the use of the fat, and this one is going pretty well. This is probably one of my better membrane peeling jobs that I've done. Sometimes I've done it and I got most of it, and then I didn't get, I don't know, I'll screw it up somehow. You got this bone on the edge, and basically if you can get a little more up off of there, you may be able to tear the whole thing off, or get pretty close to it. But that's pretty much what you need to do to ribs. You can't leave that membrane on there. So I'm probably going to rip it to the edge, and then after that I'm going to remove the rest of it. But that's one of the things you got to do to St. Louis style ribs or spare ribs before you cook them. So okay, so now that I've gotten the membranes off the bottoms of those St. Louis style ribs, I have my rub, which I just spilled. That's awesome. But this is the rub that I use in pretty much all my barbecue stuff. A lot of brown sugar, a lot of cayenne, paprika, salt, pepper, all kinds of stuff. Just look up Reichlin's rub on the internet and you'll be able to find it. So basically, one of the things that you got to do is you need to rub the ribs both top and bottom. So I'm going to use my sterile hand here to put a layer on there, and then I'm going to rub it in with my right hand. So I use the left to spread, and then I use the right hand to kind of knead it into position. And you want a nice healthy layer. The secret to good ribs and good brisket, for that matter, is a good rub. And there you go. So I'm going to flip the other side, and I'm going to rinse and repeat. I'm just going to kind of put a handful, a palmful of it, and I'm going to rub it in, and I'm going to massage it in. And yes, you should massage it in because it takes on that flavor. And I'm going to rinse and repeat for the other 2 sets of ribs, but basically you just make sure you have a nice crust on the outside, and you massage it in there and even put it in the little cracks, and it'll come out looking like $1,000,000. Okay, so when I cook ribs, and actually you can use this to smoke an awful lot of stuff, I have what is called a Weber Smoky Mountain smoker. I don't have the big one. I actually kind of have the smallest size, but it does the job for me. And so down here, one of the things with the smaller size ones is there are 3 vents that look like this one. I've noticed that if I want to actually cook ribs like at about 225, 250, somewhere in there, I got to keep all 3 sets of vents completely open throughout the cooking process. But this is where you pour your charcoal in the bottom of it. The next part of it is this middle piece, and in it there is a big bowl full of water, and you place the bowl in there, and then you place this part up on top of the smoker. You actually open this and you check your fire using this and check the sides, but basically this is the middle section of the smoker. And then the top part of the smoker, then you have 2, you place this little fella in here, and you can smoke things right above the water, or you can then have the top layer. I'm actually going to be using the top layer to cook today's ribs on top of it. I actually also have a rib rack that goes on top. And then the last piece is the actual top. So when you place everything together, it looks like a big pill. So that's what I'm going to use. One of the reasons that this slows down the cooking process so much, and I feel like the small ones aren't hot enough, is the purpose of a smoker is to slow down the combustion, to keep the temperatures low and slow, and also the point of having the water in there is to keep the moisture way up. As opposed to a charcoal grill like this one, your standard Weber, this is designed so that you can cook at really hot temperatures all the way down to low through the ventings at the top and the bottom here. So that's the fundamental difference between a smoker and a regular grill. For today's ribs, I'm going to definitely be doing the smoker. I'm going to light that fire here in a second. Last thing I'm going to show you is I actually am going to be using applewood chips to smoke the ribs. So basically for the first hour and 15, hour and a half, they're going to be on the very top of this. Then there's another step, and I'll get into that later when I actually get to it. Okay, I have lit my charcoal in the charcoal chimney, and I'm ready to pour it. But one of the things about smokers is once you pour it, and you want to kind of pour it in a circular fashion, but still within the bounds of that ring, you have to assemble the grill and then let the water and everything get hot. So you have to let it sit for like 25 minutes after you've already finished lighting the charcoal so that the thing is at the correct temperature and moisture and all that stuff. So I'm going to pick this guy up and set him aside just for a second. Put the ring in, and then I'm going to pour these guys out. And then it's kind of even right there. And then I'm going to put this guy on. And I'm going to put the top grill on. And I'm going to then assemble the top like this. And whoops, we got to let it go. And once you have everything into position like this, and I have the 3 vents open here, we're going to let this heat up for about 15, 20, 25 minutes, and then I'm actually going to start cooking ribs after that. Okay, so I'm pretty much ready to put my ribs onto the grill, and what I have here is a rib rack. The Weber ones are usually best to get, but you can get, I've used other ones in the past, they were just fine. So basically what you do is you set it up kind of in the middle as best you can. Actually, I'm going to have to set it up this way because I need the ribs to be able to sit and then fold. The other thing about the ribs then is the question is which side should go up? On this one, I know that this side should go up for 2 reasons. One, there's this flap of meat that doesn't have any bone in it, and that's usually on the same top side as the rib. The other clue to me is this isn't bone, this is cartilage. So when it's got the cartilage, that's what should be on top, as opposed to these guys, that is straight up hard bone. So that one, this guy should be up. So what I'm going to do is I just kind of fold him over, and I try to make sure that he fits into the edge there. I'm also then going to do the same thing. Well, we have bone on the bottom here, but we have cartilage. The other thing is, look how big that flap is. That's going to be a nice piece of meat when you're done with it. And I rinse and repeat right here. And I try to keep them off one another, but in a small confined space like this, you do what you can, right? And then last but not least, once again, this is the cartilage side of the bone, so that's the one that should be up. And then I basically set that guy up, and I tuck these in as best as I can. In fact, I will scoot the rack forward just a little bit. And last but not least, there was a piece of meat on the edge of one of those. I'm gonna cook that with the rest. But there's one other thing that I gotta do after I cover this guy up, now that I got all the pork juice off of my gloves. The last thing that I have to do to this to make sure everything is cool is, first, everything is nice and sealed. This goes down. The temperature is currently registering at 225. The next thing that I have to do is I gotta open the side vent, and I have to actually start smoking these guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these wet apple chips, and I'm just going to start throwing them in there. And I'm not going to put all of them in. I'm only going to put probably a third of what I intend to use. A nice big chunk right there. And then now that those are up and running in there, as soon as I close this vent, you should start to see the smoke of the apple wood start reeking out of the top of this. And this will happen probably in another minute or two, but you'll start to, you can even see the smoke kind of coming out the side. There will be smoke coming up out of this smoker, and hence why it gets its name. Now the next thing that I have to do after this is, as these things are cooking, and they're going to be on here for probably about an hour and 15, an hour and a half, is I have to come out and check on them and make sure that they're not dry. When I make sure that they're not dry, I keep them wet with a spray bottle full of apple juice and bourbon. This is about 2.5 cups of apple juice and about a cup of bourbon, and I got it shooken up. And this is what I'm gonna do throughout the course of the cooking. The other thing is, if I don't use this whole thing, the next phase of the cooking after this involves the use of liquid, particularly apple juice, bourbon, and also my good friend butter. So if I don't use everything in this spray bottle, I have a next stage for it in which all of it will get used. Okay, after an hour and a half, hour 15, hour 40, it depends on how it is. These ribs are about ready for step 2 of the process. So when you look at step 2 of the process, Maddie, you can tell that these are well on their way to being cooked, but they're not ready yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these off the grill, put them on here, and then I'm going to treat them with aluminum foil and some other stuff once I get them in the house. But if you really want your ribs to be borderline braised, this is the way to do it. All right, so phase 1 involved putting the initial smoke ring and everything onto the ribs using the Smoky Mountain smoker. But now what we got to do is we're going to take these ribs and we're going to finish them. This is the second to last phase. And I have it flipped over for a purpose because I want to cut this guy in half as best as I can. So the best thing to do is to look at how many bones you have. And when you look at it from the bottom, you can see where the bones begin and end. And so this will allow me to kind of make a decent estimation. So I'm gonna cut all of these guys in half. And after I cut them all in half, what I'm going to do after that is I am going to make sure that as I cut them in half, I'm going to wrap them all up inside of aluminum foil. So you can see that they're most of the way done, but there's still one little flavor aspect of these guys that we didn't add. And I'm gonna add it in the next step. So I get about right here, I'm cutting. These guys are all in half. They're most of the way done, but they're not quite finished. So what I'm gonna do after this then, I'm gonna use aluminum foil. And I am going to wrap these guys. And when I wrap them, I'm gonna pull out a chunk of aluminum foil, and I'm not going to rip it off yet. And I'm going to put them bone side down. I'm going to take a stick of butter and a piece of butter. And I'm actually going to take that all the way out as far as I can go. And I actually didn't mean to rip this, but we'll make it work. I'll have to do a double wrap. But I'm going to turn this up. I'm going to turn these into cones at the end so that anything I pour into this thing becomes part of what we're looking for, as far as, like, anything that I pour in here is going to be liquid. So this is my spray bottle spray, and I didn't use all of it, so I'm just going to put a little dash of that in there. I'm going to take this. I'm going to also cover it up with another layer of aluminum foil, and I'm going to make sure that I keep these guys completely and utterly sealed inside with that liquid. And I'm going to rinse and repeat the same process for all the sets of ribs. And the reason I'm going to do this is because we are going to now braise them. I'm going to put these guys back up onto the grill for about an hour, and I'm going to let the chemistry of the liquid, the butter, and everything work their magic on these guys. Make a little cone, make a little cone, put a little bit of liquid in there, wrap it up, and then take the last bit of aluminum foil, and I'm going to rinse and repeat that process until I have all of those ribs done, and then I'm going to put them up on the grill, which will be the next section of the video. So after about an hour or maybe 45 minutes, depends on the temp of the grill, of being inside of that aluminum foil with the butter, what I did is I unfoiled them, and then I covered them with layers of barbecue sauce. And this probably got about 15 more minutes so that the barbecue sauce becomes completely glazed onto there. I have a second rack underneath that has the other 3 parts of it, but that's essentially like how I do my ribs. So these probably got about 10-15 minutes left. Then I'll take them off the grill and serve them with the rest of the dinner.